I'm sure there are lots of questions percolating out there you'd like to ask of Barry. We are going to have some Q&A that includes Barry and our next speaker when she is done. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Janet Atkins. Her career has focused on the intersection of philanthropic strategy, values, and education. Her 20-year fundraising career included major institutional advancement opportunities at Harvard Teaching Hospitals, Duke University, Georgetown University, Emory, and the University of Virginia. She was among the first in the United States to recognize the need for an organized response to the impact of the $10 trillion transfer of wealth over the next 30 years related to the demographic issues that Barry was just discussing. After coming to this realization, she left her fundraising career in 1998 to head up an innovative new subsidiary of the Boston-based law firm Goulston & Storrs. And as the founder and CEO of Philanthropic Advisors, LLC, she was responsible for $100 million in annual grant making for 25 families. Janet now leads her own independent firm, Ridgeway Philanthropy, which focuses on creating the personal and philanthropic agenda for the responsible use of individual and family wealth. Janet helps families and their charitable entities develop strategic and values-based methods of giving, guiding them across the whole trajectory from building sound institutions to developing the strategies, systems, and programs that give them life and make them effective. Janet's leadership has guided the commitment of over $2 billion philanthropic dollars for nonprofits domestically and internationally. Janet is also on the faculty of the SilverBridge Institute, which empowers individuals to realize their personal and philanthropic goals by providing education on investments, wealth planning, philanthropy, and family continuity. And while I could go on listing Janet's professional credentials, I think it's more important to share that facilitating social change is as much an avocation as a vocation for her. She sits or has sat on the board, advisory councils, and committees of numerous organizations, including the Worldwide WCA in Geneva, the Norman B. Leventhal Map Center of the Boston Public Library, Emerald Necklace Conservancy, Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts, and several other organizations. I hope that many of you will have the chance to speak with Janet today, and I think you will find that she radiates this infectious intellectual energy and a passion for making a difference. It is no wonder that she has been recognized by the YWCA as a Woman of Achievement and by the United Way as a Communicator of the Year. I am very pleased to present our keynote speaker, Janet Atkins.
It's rather difficult to follow Barry. I'm a complete devotee of his work, but you will have no slides. So good morning and thank you, Rebecca. It's really terrific to be here today, and I want you to know that I met Rebecca in the 7 degrees of separation of Kevin Bacon or whatever that thing is. I learned about her work and, of course, the Northeastern Students for Giving through a wonderful philanthropist and energetic woman, Catherine Gross, who I understand is a great advisor to Rebecca. I met Catherine Gross through my wonderful business partner, June Thorne, who is making a difference daily, using capital market solutions with her clients to have greater impact with their investments and their philanthropy. And I met, through June, Barry Landry, a woman who embodies the very characteristics of philanthropic risk and reward that I'm going to talk about today, and all of these women are with us this morning. These 4 women, including the incredible leader, Rebecca, connect heart to head daily in their pursuit of a better society. Barry's work at Northeastern is incredibly important to the philanthropic field. At Ridgeway, we use his research daily to inform our strategy for the families we work for. His marriage of statistical data and trends across all sectors, along with his analysis of what this will mean for the marketplace, is second to none. If you have not read his papers and monographs, I highly recommend them to you. Barry, you have given us a great deal to think about. I do feel like I'm leaning over this podium and very short this morning. For some reason, I feel very short. As we go into the breakout sessions today and we listen to the panels that are going to talk with us, I hope we will consider the economic imperative to train, recruit, and retain young workers for jobs across the spectrum of our industries, not because it is the right thing to do, but because the economy overall will depend on it. These are not issues that are reserved to the nonprofit sector. These are business imperatives that will require new business models that combine private, public and philanthropic dollars to solve. I tend not to pontificate on the philanthropic market. I believe when you've seen one philanthropist, you've seen one philanthropist. But there is a new normal that I believe is imperative for the third sector to embrace and learn to leverage to ensure our success in this century and beyond. To do less spells turmoil in the sector, and for better or worse, may lead to the demise of some NGOs and will definitely lead to the dilution of impact on the world's most serious problems. As I look out at this amazing young audience, the next generation is no longer in the future. It is here, it is now, and your presence is being felt in everything we do. I believe it will be your generation that will shape philanthropy for the next 25 years and beyond, not unlike the impact of those great philanthropists, Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford, in the last century. I'm going to talk about three things today. First, I want to talk about the current economic trends related to the social economy and how it and you think about money and the utility of the dollar. Second, I'm going to juxtapose those trends against the backdrop of the world and the factors that limit the growth and full actualization of new solutions that need to come out of the third sector. Third, I will leave you with some thoughts about how to become influencers. It's not a word in the dictionary, but it is one I use. How to leverage your resources to create change, how to optimize your position, be it as a philanthropist or an NGO operating in today's social economy. I believe philanthropy is not just about money. It's about courage, political will, and the influential use of power. And with the passage of Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission, we may have to rethink the core assumptions about the positive nature of the influential power of philanthropy. We may have unleashed, with that one court case, an unpredictable and potentially negative influence over the first, second, and third sectors of our economy. America's nonprofit organizations, now at over 1.6 million in the United States, have played a vital role in nearly every important social development in this country. Over the years, thousands of nonprofits have worked to assure that their constituencies' interests are understood and acknowledged by policymakers. Civil rights groups, environmental organizations, consumer advocates, and other public interest groups have provided the only voice, oftentimes, for underrepresented communities. As Brian O'Connell, professor of public service at Tufts University, has observed, quote, nonprofits serve every conceivable aspect of the human condition and are willing to stand up and be counted on any public issue, end quote. As corporations and moneyed special interest groups increase their role in policy, politics, and policy making, the presence of nonprofits in the policy debate is more critical than ever. The key challenge for philanthropy will be to understand and adapt to this new normal, the one that Barry has so eloquently explained to us with those graphs. It is real. Today, this is as much a landscape shaped by the dynamics of political giving and impact investing as it is by charitable giving. It is the gravitational pulls and pushes, the choices between and among all of these resources and the enterprises that they fund that will matter most in the years ahead. I believe there are three consecutive circles of inquiry worth pursuing in modern philanthropy today. The first circle has to do with a deeper understanding of the economic marketplace in order for philanthropists to have the influence to change a sector, to motivate and shape outcomes and contribute to the understanding of the marketplace is a great opportunity and one we must seize. However, it is more than grant making. It means shifting our thinking and our perspective from the interactions between nonprofits and donors to a much broader frame that encompasses all of the ways we use private resources for public good. And it is imperative that we juxtapose that with the use and allocation of public dollars. We have to understand how government dollars flow and how it impacts particular sectors. The second circle involves the cross and mix of disciplines to get a better understanding of what is driving markets in the world. It means talking with those outside of our sector to expand our knowledge of using new principles applied to old problems. And it means understanding how money flows in and out of the third sector, and more importantly, how capital markets operate and the powerful use of government funding which dwarfs private funding for good. The third circle sits in this room. It has to do with the potential for intergenerational discord. Young people who are 20 to 30 years younger than my generation have a totally different experience and manner of absorbing and processing information. How will this generation make decisions? How will they understand the big looming debate about the legacy of entitlements and debt left by us? How will they understand the economy? How will they interpret the impact of polarizing rhetoric fostered by social media amplified by a cynical political class? And lastly, how will social media and networks of activists use data and technology to fuel discord and finally change? Crossing all three of these circles are two silos, and they are very vertical. Those that do the work and those that fund the work. It is a relative isolation of these two groups that must change. And the lack of a holistic approach to the complex issues we face today makes solving the problems ever more difficult. Holistic thinking requires that these two silos, those that do the work and those that fund the work, come together in a much more efficient business model. And it will require the courage to analyze our strengths, acknowledge our weaknesses, and change for the better on both sides of the balance sheet, funders and NGOs. The field of social innovation is developing rapidly all over the world with new institutions, new methods, growing confidence, and an evidence of impact. Social innovators are changing the way governments work, the way civil society achieves impact, and the actions of business. Often, social innovation involves making, reusing existing ideas, the application of an old idea or the transfer of an old idea to one part of the economy or another. And social innovation is happening in every sector, first, second, and third. Leading businesses are responding to the growing importance of the social economy and the impact of corporate responsibility policy on their bottom line and their profits. Look at GE and its focus on renewable energy, Alcoa and its focus on the use and reuse of aluminum, and Puma's environmental focus on production and recycling. All of these have had a positive net impact on their profits and shareholder value. The world can no longer be compartmentalized, and the status quo, where business creates profit and jobs, government sets the rules and provides the infrastructure, civil society defines the ethics, and religion provides and presides over the spiritual matters of our lives, this will no longer lead to the positive change we need in today's world. Social innovations come to life through collaborations that cut across public and private sectors. Frequently, they make use of new technology, including broadband and mobile communication. And some of the successes are now part of our everyday life, from microcredit in rural communities to web platforms that link teachers and students, to banking services using mobile phones, community land trusts, and restorative justice programs. All have seen the impact. Just look at the Ushahidi project. It was led by a handful of entrepreneurial Tufts students. In the aftermath of Haiti, their unique software turned cell phones into a real-time online disaster map, usable by rescue workers and organizations. No headquarters, no CEO, no infrastructure, just 4 programmers, some very flexible philanthropic investments, including a program-related investment, and a knack for distributing technology that has made them a force in the humanitarian sector, now used by over 3 large billion-dollar humanitarian nonprofits. The field of social innovation is now beginning to gather momentum with significant investment from government, foundations, and business. Over the next few years, I do believe it is possible that the ability to support, manage, and grow innovations across the world will become a core competence within governments, business, and NGOs. While the social innovation field combines commitment, experience, and energy, it lacks systematic investment. It lacks core financing. In particular, it has very little access to long-term sustainable funding. The result is that there is no shortage of good ideas. Far too, however, achieve the impact that they could have. Social innovation is now at a critical point, but I fear NGOs are not organized to access and influence funding, nor are they or their traditional funders prepared to adapt to this new normal. This is not about doing more with less or doing less with less. It is about a complete reorganization, reorientation, and developing horizontal strategies that cut across those three circles and those two silos that will leverage social capital for change. This new normal is about addressing how investment capital is harnessed for social change. A large part of the answer is going to lie in attracting new sources of capital to fuel the global expansion of innovations that have now been proven to work. This means embracing the role of impact investing and being part of the much-needed debate on risk, returns, and what it means to be an investment partner to social ventures. Impact investing, or investing private capital in social enterprise that creates positive social impact, and as a bonus, it might also yield a small financial return, is moving from the fringe to the mainstream. More than 200 impact investment funds are now registered. Many foundations, NGOs, and mainstream financial institutions are becoming increasingly active in impact investing. It is also on the top of mind of government agencies. Almost everywhere you look, from the proactive legislation introduced by the Brazilian government last year to the very recent efforts of the European Union to launch a social business initiative, the Social Innovation Fund inaugurated by President Obama in 2009, and the new Global Impact Economy Initiative run by the U.S. State Department, investing in social innovation is the one thing that seems to be unifying governments around the world. There is an enormous potential here. In a best-case scenario, we're well on our way to figuring out how to harness market forces and attract commercial capital to solve our largest social problems. At the same time, there are worrying trends that warrant serious debate and corrective action. Are we too focused on the capital and the financial returns to capital rather than concentrating on why the capital is being used in the first place as a tool to solve big social problems? Are investors and investees speaking the same language when they talk about risk in social innovation? Are we creating more hype based on good intentions and hope? We're not yet there, but I believe we can be. But we need a new narrative. If everyone in this sector believes that we're witnessing the start of an industry with truly transformative potential, then we all need to do our part. Investors, foundations, governments, universities, and most importantly, social entrepreneurs. We must work together to demonstrate how social capital can most effectively encourage innovation and scale for maximum impact. We have to discuss, agree, and collateralize what each of us brings to the table, this unprecedented engine of social change. The economy will rebound, as we saw from Barry's slides. It will stabilize over time. Change brings possibility along with challenge, and today's nonprofits have the opportunity to confront the new economic and cultural realities and restructure their business models. It has never been of greater imperative that nonprofits across the country change how they do business. Those that don't, I believe, are destined to fail. This may be the regulating force needed to shed the weak and promote the healthy. As we heard from Barry, Massachusetts is trending upward. Our unemployment numbers are decreasing, but we also know that public funding will never rise to pre-2008 levels. So if government funding is unpromising, can we turn to the philanthropic sector to rebalance the revenue stream? Not surprisingly, the prospects here are sobering. While private philanthropy in this country is critically important, it does not drive the bus. Contrary to common perception, private philanthropy funds a relatively small percentage of services provided by the nonprofit sector. The overwhelming proportion is funded by state and federal government. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the role of private philanthropy in America was to provide social benefit that individuals could not provide for themselves. Through the 20th century, many of these philanthropic endeavors became institutionalized and funded by private foundations and corporate giving programs, and many migrated to the government sector. In the 60s, the philanthropic sector took on a new role, to educate and influence government about social justice issues and to experiment with solutions. The concept at the time was that government would then pick up those solutions, if successful, and take them to scale across the country. In a democratic society committed to the separation of church and state, private philanthropy continued to support quality of life endeavors and religious pursuits outside of the responsibility of big government. This clear expectation for the role of philanthropy has been breaking down since the federal government began to shed itself of entire programs starting in the 1980s. But the fundamental reality remains that private philanthropy can never replace government funding to basic human needs. While philanthropy is a $300 billion annual market, government funding across all sectors annually is more than $1.5 trillion. The nonprofit sector, like the rest of the nation, has been riveted by this great economic crisis. The economic crisis continues to threaten large numbers of organizations with at least hard times, and I do believe we will see extinction for many. The nonprofit sector is now at an inflection point that will fundamentally reshape when surviving nonprofits find themselves in this new reality, this new normal, not just economically, demographically, technologically, and socially. They will have to change. National and global trends are changing the environment. Thoughtful observers recognize that 5 years from now, the sector will not simply have returned to its previous steady state. They know that a fundamental change in Americans' attitudes towards credit, debt, risk, work, coupled with the estimated loss of now 250,000 nonprofits, will permanently change our landscape. Business futurists see the emergence of near instantaneous communications compressing time, technology-related connectivity shrinking space, the growth of the knowledge economy valuing the intangible or services over products. They describe how these forces are blurring the boundaries between for and not-for-profit and the role of the nonprofit in this economy. Others observe that this sea change from a public sector perspective, noting the challenge to our education system, preparing today's students for careers that don't even exist today, and others predict, of course, that America over the next generation will no longer be the world's greatest economic power. We're being tested as generational and other demographic shifts change the focus from the client base of the workforce. Technology affords and demands greater responsiveness and transparency, and the blending of public, private, and nonprofit sectors creates a new competitive and collaborative opportunity, but it calls on all of us to rethink how we're organized. And this is not just the beginning. The most radical changes are not even on our radar yet. Although change is nothing new, the highly accelerated pace at which social, technological, and economic shifts are now occurring and affecting one another presents radical challenges and demands. I do not believe we are adaptive enough to understand them. The traditional approaches of our nonprofit funders and the capacity builders often fall short, and the old rules no longer apply. For us to survive and to thrive, everyone must become a futurist, and that does not mean predicting the future, which is an impossible task unless you are Barry Bluestone. But instead it means being attuned to rapid and continual shifts in the environment, continuing to evaluate and interpret how an organization can best adapt to the economics, and experimenting with new responses and approaches to old problems. Being a futurist requires both individual and institutional curiosity and a willingness to take risk, something that the third sector has found difficult to do. No one can assume that the old ways of doing business will continue to serve us in this dramatically new and ever-changing environment. We cannot rely on external experts, scholars, or think tanks to map the road ahead for us. We must have the responsibility to envision and shape the future for ourselves and our organizations and our society. The philanthropic literature says that funders and grantees must completely rethink the sector, the way they relate to each other, the way they relate to the general public. It is now presumed that the traditional funding mechanisms will no longer be sufficient for nonprofits to operate as they have over the last 100 years. I will say that a natural place to start in restructuring and creating new models is not new. It is that cost structures of multiple independent organizations can in fact be brought to greater efficiency. The broad assumption that collaborations on programming, back office services and staffing, and even outright mergers can and will reduce costs and make the sector more efficient. On the one hand, it has worked. On the other hand, it is very difficult to find the efficiencies in scale if you don't stick with it for at least 5 years. There has been tremendous literature on whether, in fact, mergers and collaborations of back office can bring efficiencies to the bottom line. It is inevitable. Whether we believe it is the right thing to do or not, there are too many nonprofits. Funders are asking for collaboration. They are asking for their current grantees and future grantees to write it into their proposals. They want to help people survive, but funders are asking themselves, will one more grant help soften the decline of this organization or only prolong the inevitable? Efforts to find new business models and program and organizational collaborations are the best solutions for many agencies, and they can inspire new money. Shared or restructured back office services can work. A great example, post-Katrina New Orleans. Healthcare was in shambles. Hospitals were closed. Public health clinics suffered. Fewer than 100 emergency beds existed. On behalf of a client that we serve, we made a very traditional planning grant to 14 healthcare providers. We asked them to come together, see if they could find common ground, serve a larger and predominantly poor and black community. The result was the creation of a new public charity called the 504 Health Network. We then gave them a very traditional seed grant, but we brought in a Bain consultant, and we asked them to create a business plan and to merge all their back office operations, 14 healthcare providers. They merged HR, finance, all their purchasing was rolled into one, insurance reimbursement negotiations, which was a bear, and a unique model of sharing personnel across all 14 institutions. If you had an amazing nurse practitioner who was also a great teacher, we would have her or he port from institution to institution to train the next group of practitioners. Then we entered a very new stage. We made a non-traditional PRI, program-related investment. It paid for the creation of technology and software that is now thriving in a 28-member network. The technology, however, we created, we put into a for-profit. The software application is now used on PDAs for doctors across the network to find specialists, make referrals, book appointments online, and download electronic health records, all on their PDA, and ensuring privacy for the patients. The mayor, Mitch Landrieu, not shabby, and the new director of public health, Karen DeSalvo, are so excited about this new app that they're considering its use now across all health providers. The entire city is now looking at adopting the app, and it's being introduced to the governor in April. The sale of the software, which we have proprietary content over, is now estimated to pay for the entire infrastructural needs of the public charity 504 Health Network. Private philanthropy, as we looked at the run rates, will not be needed after 2012. Brand new model, mixing private money to fund a new model and creating a for-profit that dangles off of the not-for-profit that funds the entire infrastructural needs. In Western Africa, we've been working for over 15 years with a three-pronged approach to improve health and economic stability in the rural areas of Senegal. The strategy began with very traditional grants to build health huts, staffed by trained health workers that we hired from the government. Health huts cost $8,000 to build, and it costs $7,000 to operate them on an annual basis. Next came FM radio stations and the distribution of crank radios to communicate safe sex behaviors and interview health workers and frame the social discussion for a region where half the population is under the age of 15. Finally, we engaged the capital markets approach. After listening to the women we supported in over 7 villages, we made a series of grants to support micro-lending banks. We built them, however, in the form of a cooperative, which involves saving and lending. The result today, 15 years later, is that the margins on the banks totally support the network of 3,500 health workers, 15 radio stations, 5 health huts built on traditional trade routes. No more private philanthropy is needed. The banking committees are owners. They are vested in the success of their lending practices and their loan guarantees, and they are working to grow economic mobility and healthier outcomes for their villages. More importantly, permanent economic frameworks have been introduced, shaped, and owned by those that directly benefit from the programs. The dramatic changes in our economy and our culture, the advent of the global economy, and instant communications 24/7 all spell opportunity for nonprofits to bring fresh perspectives to their original mission. But unlike the private sector, which is forced to make constant improvement in products and services by competition in the marketplace, the nonprofit sector is slow to change. Economic reality has now thrown down the gauntlet. To paraphrase the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, nothing stays the same but change. There is room for new trendsetters to take the lead. No one is the lead dog in this economy. In the age of the new normal, funders expect that the strongest agencies will even review their operations and think differently about how they deliver their services, no matter how successful they may be today. There is some funding available for this kind of internal process to change your model, but it is unlikely to be enough to fully implement the major restructuring that is needed. The funder's intention may be to nudge you along, but it is the belief of most philanthropists that internal change, model change for nonprofits, must be an internal organizational imperative. I'll tell you about one brand new last November collaboration that we funded. It's called the Co-Invest Economic Mobility Model. It's created by Crittenden Women's Union, Heading Home, One Family, and the very forward-thinking Cambridge Housing Authority. It exemplifies what we think is the kind of agency self-investment that is needed to transform their services. Using their best strategies that they have honed now in the case of some of these organizations for over 60 years, and an incredible amount of data crunching. Excuse me. These 4 agencies are using opportunity vouchers, unlocking Section 8 housing vouchers that are using the money that comes in the Section 8 to fund job and workforce development costs, child care, community and 4-year college, and housing and transportation needs. In a unique arrangement, they are partnering with their families, making compacts with each family that they serve for their investment as a family in time, energy, and fiscal responsibility, matching the family's intellectual and emotional investment for change in corresponding assets that they bring in the opportunity voucher. What's particularly interesting about this stake in the ground is that each of the 4 agencies, and we worked with them for over 18 months in a planning grant, they've now joined forces to raise money together as one. They've agreed on a shared data platform, one fiscal agent for all the money, one training program across all 4 organizations, one set of success characteristics, and each have acknowledged, as we set out and made the first grant to them, that they will be fundamentally different at the end of this 5-year pilot. More importantly, each of them is investing over $500,000 each of their own operating budget into this new economic mobility model. They're putting their own skin in the game. They acknowledge that the work represents a new normal, and that they will fundamentally be different organizations, and perhaps not all of them will be here when the 5-year pilot is done. Matching a family's intellectual capacity with dollars is an interesting concept. More importantly, they've put their stake in the ground, each of these agencies, to be different. We believe that there is tremendous interest in doing just that. People are not waiting for the federal government to bail them out. I have an embargoed press release on my desk from 8 o'clock this morning. Mayor Rahm Emanuel is going to announce in Chicago this Thursday that they are embarking on a $7 billion plan to transform the city's infrastructure. It includes projects to expand the city's largest airport, improve streets, water systems, schools, community colleges, parks, and the commuter rail network. The city estimates that this will drive 30,000 new jobs over the next 18 months, and Emanuel suggested that doing less than this integrated, comprehensive, public-private project, which he is now calling Building a New Chicago, that it is going to keep their struggling and crumbling infrastructure from falling down around his ears, end quote. He also believes that these can-do kinds of collaborations, which are also happening in Colorado, Washington State, Arizona, and Virginia, that this opportunity to finance economic development from within requires private philanthropy, his state and local dollars, and corporations all to come to the table with shared interests. It is also going to be financed by social impact bonds, something that we've seen in the UK that has become incredibly successful. So as you can see from some of these examples, this is the new normal. Research has identified 5 key trends converging to reshape the social sector. You heard some of it from Barry. While each dynamic has profound implications for how nonprofits will do business, it is the convergence of these 5 that I believe are going to fundamentally change us forever. The first trend, demographic changes, redefining population in the third sector. You saw it from Barry's slides. Technological advances changing how we do our work. New networks enabling work to be organized in new ways. This great interest, as we see from the program here at Northeastern, in civic engagement and volunteerism, and the sector boundaries between for-profit and not-for-profit are blurred. Each of these 5 major trends is changing the way the nonprofit sector is operating. The opportunity to develop a for-profit enterprise and not be taxed on it is a great engine for change. Corporations becoming increasingly active in the social sphere, the crossing over between for and not-for-profit, those seeking to create social impact, we are all going to be driven by these trends. The future will bring a wide array of structural options and a great willingness to experiment. And I do believe today and tomorrow's philanthropists are willing to fund the greater risk. But there will have to be compelling social value attached to it. The driving question will be, what do we want to accomplish? Successful organizations will quickly move beyond traditional assumptions about how the goals are to be attempted and to think creatively about the structural form and recognize that different goals demand different solutions. At the time of these blurring boundaries between for and not-for-profit, it is of decreasing importance, I believe, for young people, social activists, to have their activism actually identified with one organization. They cross organizations and are far more interested in the sector itself. How will they change and benefit society by their own youthful activism? I believe that to engage the younger generation in social impact work, we will be successful only if we show that we are not rooted to our old models. But that does mean nonprofits are going to have to take greater risk. Not only are these younger generations less tied to any particular organizational form and more open to creating their own structure and their networks through their iPhones that advance their own social values, but they're also entering the workforce with the expectation that technology can be leveraged to solve most problems and growing efficiency. For example, tomorrow's nonprofit leaders, and we've met a few of them, are likely to understand that open source technology platforms and the intricacies of fundraising can actually be married to help one another. And we have found that they're willing to share. And when something works and they're successful, they instantaneously tell their colleagues across the country using their iPhone. Online, mobile activism, as we have certainly seen in the Arab Spring, networked organizing, creating new ways for individuals to fulfill their service goals. This notion of membership is old and has died. Volunteering and social engagement is going to happen outside of organizations, and this transformation is only going to continue to redefine the sector. I have merely scratched the surface. The interconnectedness of each moving part hastens the pace for change. New groups of people, including the baby boomers, my generation, the next generation leaders sitting in this room, the emerging minority, majority, are all coming together. These players are adopting new tools, new technologies, social media, the capability to foster change. In their speed of use, the ability to network people and facilitate decentralized action, these technologies will influence people's values, including work-life balance, the desire to participate, the demand for measurable results, and the expectation of openness and transparency. In this changing environment, transformation is not optional. The future will demand a collective rethinking. How we work together, how we spend our dollars together, and how we think about this permeation of boundaries between for-profit and not-for-profit, and using models that have worked in one for the other. So I want to close with something a little more personal. A very long time ago, I asked my mother why she helped poor people. I was about 4 at the time. Why she and my father built free daycare centers in very poor neighborhoods across the South. Why my father built free medical clinics for poor black people in downtown Atlanta. Why she put together kits of toiletries for poor women that were abused and mistreated. As a young child, I frankly did not understand why she went out of her way to do this. Her answer has stayed with me a lifetime. It has probably framed my entire career, and now that I am cruising into the latter part of my 50s, it is interesting for me to say that I'm probably more like my mother than I ever wanted to say I would be. Her answer: because I can. My mother came face to face with the not-so-pleasant side of poverty in the South. She acknowledged the existence of her own privileged birth, and she had the courage and the willpower to do something with what she had. What she taught me was our greatest challenge in life is to love the poorest in the world as though they were your own children. That by loving them, you can't ignore them, and that your actions, however small, can put them on a path to a greater and more productive future. As the gap between those with and without resources, with and without education, and access grows even greater, it is imperative that each of us help open the door of one of those children who are less fortunate, the same kind of doors we would open if they were our own children. So what does that mean for your work, your money, your influence? It means that each of us must step solidly, deliberately, thoughtfully into leadership positions, in front of the room and behind the room. It means building coalitions. It means reaching out to everyone in your community. It means listening. It means we must ask all Americans to have the political will to invest the resources needed to substantially eliminate the educational disparities between those who are poor and those who are not. This political will involves more than money. It requires that each of us be advocates for one another and to care about everyone in our community. We must embrace the role of convener, organizer, change agent, architect of community frameworks that build new theories of change. We must gravitate towards the objective, informed voices in the room. We must partner with other like-minded organizations to build pathways out of poverty and social injustice. Philanthropists and nonprofits can use their collective voice to impact policy and legislation around earned income tax credit, early childhood education, universal child care, affordable health insurance coverage for all Americans, access to capital, affordable housing, job training, and the living wage. But this can happen only with the help of modern capital tools that are catalysts for change, and philanthropists to put their resources behind that change. The problems of race, culture, class are world problems, and they require forward-thinking leaders, forward-thinking organizations, and new tools. Finally, it means that foundations and the philanthropists that fund them must own up to the work that does and does not work. Failure happens, especially when there is significant risk involved. I have found with great disappointment that many foundations hold to their theories of change and their models, even in the face of facts and data that demonstrate that it didn't work. We are supposed to be the nimble ones. We are supposed to be able to embrace risk and new ideas. Too often I find concentrated pockets of wealth married to entrenched ideas, fueled by staff holding on to turf and an inability to stomach an idea that came from the outside. I know that realistic discouragement and disappointment is sometimes needed to put fire in the belly. I also know that what we need in this country today is a hell of a lot of fire in the belly. I believe that in adversity, we will find the bend in the road that leads us to where we need to be, and that the best things, those which mean the most and are treasured over a lifetime, are not easily done or easily acquired. So in the spirit of delivering fire in the belly, as my mother probably did every Sunday afternoon, which is probably why I am who I am, I'm asking each of you to be a futurist. Help tackle the challenges we face. This challenge is not reserved for the poorest in our country. It is not for them to overcome. It is for all of us to accept the challenge, because if we do not respond to this great divide, to this challenge. We will leave a generation of young people behind. It is something we cannot afford, nor can our economies survive. But it takes power. Power of the purse, power of courage, power of leverage, the power of influence. So wherever you fall in the third sector, be you young philanthropist, old philanthropist, NGO head, aspiring young person to be in public service, here are 5 easy steps. Not so easy, but they're easy to remember. Be informed. Learn everything about a subject and the content area in which you are interested. Ask a lot of questions. Get busy. Read. Listen, especially before you talk. That is for both sides of the balance sheet, those asking for the money and those giving it away. 2, be engaged. Learn a lot about the very best organizations doing the very finest work. Join the board. Get involved at the program level. Volunteer. Understand how they finance themselves, how they use their dollars, how they meet their mission. Then be their advocate wherever you go. Become fearless in your passion for them. 3, look for leaders that understand risk, reward, and results. Organizations are larger than any one single individual, but it is the rare organization that can succeed without great leadership. Organizations that do not have fearless leaders will go out of business. Nonprofits must work on a problem with a passion and zeal that will put yourself out of business. Do not maintain status quo. 4, plan to stay involved for the long haul. There's no such thing as an exit strategy. Once you've found your passion, stick with it over time. It takes years to create change. And finally, have passion. What we do is hard work. Without passion, it makes absolutely no logical sense to stay in the game. If you don't love it, you will give up. And without passion, you will fail. Finally, no matter where I go or how old I get, my Southern roots remain with me. And so I leave you with what my mother ended every board meeting she chaired with. A good old girl from the South once said, if you want happiness for an hour, take a nap. If you want happiness for a day, get married. If you want happiness for a year, inherit money. But if you want happiness for a lifetime, help someone. Give of your time, your energy, your resources, yourself. Thank you for inviting me. Oh. Barry, can we take 2? Barry, come join me. If you have questions, Barry and I are happy to take them, or you can go on a potty break. Yes, ma'am. Yes. So I should actually bring my wonderful partner, Dune Thorne, up here. Social impact bonds came out of the UK. Oh, we're going to hear about them in the next panel, Rebecca has just told me. But social impact bonds originated out of the UK. The idea is private investors, just think about a municipal bond, would put money in. If the subject you're trying to change has enough change and you set the bar or the standard or the percentage of change that you're looking for, then those investors get their money back. Okay? It's almost like a municipal bond, but you're using private capital in order to fund the change rather than a municipal bond or a state AAA bond. But you'll hear more in the next panel. And they're very cool. And if you heard the President's State of the Union, he talked about social impact bonds. The UK has used them very successfully in incarceration issues in order to recidivism, in order to try to keep people from going back into prison. They've used social impact bonds as a way to create change, particularly in jobs, job training, and to keep them out of the justice system. Any other questions? You're kidding me. We were at least Barry, who's so much more attractive than I am. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for your words. I'm a person who I've had a long background in working in the traditional nonprofits and how we used to do things, so I really appreciate pushing us forward. And I've recently got into the local public sector. Could you give a few words about how nonprofits and the public sector on the local level can work together? Because the public sector now has much less funding as well, and we need to look at new models of working with nonprofits, new models of programming and of funding. So if you have any advice on working with the nonprofit sector.
Well, Barry's going to probably have 2 minutes of a response, so I'm going to give him that. But I'm just going to say the fundamental first characteristic of working with, whether it's local, state, or federal government, is that there has to be a lot more listening. And everyone's got to come to the table, okay, collateralizing what they bring to the table. Yours may be the experience of doing the work, theirs is the experience of funding the work, but much of it is going to have to change. So it is that two-way, rather than silos, the two-way kind of horizontal listening that is going to produce new strategies. I do believe private philanthropy is the engine, the lever, if you think of it as leverage, to come in and fund, whether it's in a pilot or a planning grant, the new idea. And then local, state, federal government's got to be in that space to watch, see, listen, and be willing to fund something different. If you've not read the literature, the federal government and the state's not much better, is so used to the old models. If you look at the NIH, I was just in Bethesda about 3 weeks ago. The NIH is notorious for this. They give R01 grants. They're 5 years of funding, guaranteed. In year 2, the data is already telling you that the experiment's not going to work, but they continue the funding. So there has to be this self-realization that stopping listening to data, understanding what's working and not working, listening to all parties, those that do and those that fund, has to happen on a much more regular basis. Barry, I know you've got an opinion.
Well, let me just give you some examples. First of all, what a spectacular.
Oh, you're so sweet. I love Barry.
What a wonderful, wonderful introduction to this. I hear lots of speeches, but I haven't heard one like that in a long time. So thank you very much. Specific examples. We do a lot of work here at the School for Public Policy and Urban Affairs in the Dukakis Center with the Boston Foundation. We've done a lot of work on affordable housing going all the way back to 2000. Through the Boston Foundation, we then created the Commonwealth Housing Task Force, which isn't even a 501c3. In fact, it doesn't really exist in space. But the Boston Foundation convenes private developers, the Chamber of Commerce, some of the largest banks, advocates for the homeless, private and public sector, private and nonprofit developers, CDCs, to come together around affordable housing. They then got a university, our Dukakis Center, to write a law, Chapter 40R, to create affordable housing. And then we found out we needed to do something about how we'd educate the kids if they lived in a 40R community. We wrote another law, 40S. And so we brought together the state government, which funds this with small grants to individual communities that do the right thing and open up affordable housing opportunities for a diverse population, by bringing together the foundation world, the private sector, and the public sector. The second is something happening just this week. Again, the Boston Foundation has been working with community colleges and recognizing how important they are for middle skills. We had the Commonwealth Summit a few weeks ago in which we devoted all our attention, private sector, public sector, third sector, working together on this. And this week there'll be a rally at the Great Hall in the State House to push for reforms and for additional funds for community colleges so that more young people, as well as adults, can take advantage of community colleges and not only help themselves, but fill that gap that demographics will leave us with. So those are just two examples of how all can work together.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, a question to Barry. Your last slide, your talk, quote it more than paraphrase it, it's saying future philanthropy is more about economic prosperity than about charity. And I guess what interests me there is probably people in this room agree with that when we came here. We certainly makes a lot of sense hearing that. But given that so much giving, about 3/4 of all giving comes from individuals, not from foundations, not from corporations, what are the possibilities we have of publicizing that message that for every person who wants to give away money, give care?
Janet, do you want to take a crack?
Hit, and I'll do the follow-up.
Okay.
Go, you start.
I think the way we do it is, first of all, more and more foundations are talking that way. And we're realizing, particularly given the demographics I showed you, that if we don't take full advantage of every person we have, not only who live here now, but immigrants who will come to our shores, we can end up not only not helping them, but undermining prosperity for everyone else as well. And I think we're beginning to realize that. I remember when we started the housing work, back in 2000, I had just gotten to Northeastern, and I got a call from none other, and this is pre-scandal, from Bernard Cardinal Law. And he said, I want you to meet with me, if you would, at my headquarters, which was out in Brighton, because I want to talk about affordable housing. We in the church realize this is very important. And the next day, I got a call from Paul Guzzi, who's the CEO and president of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. And we ended up all meeting in the Cardinal's residence. And the Cardinal was in his flowing robes, and Paul was in a three-piece suit. And I remember the Cardinal turning to me and saying, Barry, we have seen housing prices go up at double digits for now almost 5 years. And then, by the way, they'd go up for another 5 years after that. We need you to do a study about it because there's a moral obligation that we find affordable housing for people who need it. And I remember Paul just smiling a little bit, turning to the Cardinal and turning to me and said, Barry, it may be a moral obligation, but speaking for the business community, we know it's an economic necessity. And I think when you put together the idea of moral obligation and economic necessity, and you marry those two together and recognize how important they are, more and more people will understand the role they have to play.
Barry is absolutely right, but I want to get to your question. You're so correct about the percentages. 80% of giving in this country, that $300 billion number, comes from individuals either through their family foundation or through their personal checkbook. A third of that 80% goes to religious organizations. Okay? And I'm not saying take that off the top. I'm simply saying we have to understand and recognize the relativity of that number. But I believe the power to change rests in each of us. So talk about what you know. Challenge respectfully what other people think. Be informed. I think it starts, whether it's with the blogs or whether it's with students, it's in the atmosphere, so use it. We're at a reflection point where I think most people are willing to at least listen, if not acknowledge that they need to change, but they will listen. Convene. That power to convene is extremely important. The next time Rebecca does one of these, bring someone with you that you know needs to hear a different story. And talk amongst yourselves at the break we're about to have in 2 seconds about what they're doing that's bringing about change. I know we're not getting to your question. I promise I will come down right after this, Barry and I both will, and answer your question. We have to take a break. Rebecca wants to take this podium over again. Barry and I so appreciate your time, your attention, your enthusiasm, and we're more than willing to take questions when we go get a cup of coffee. Thank you.
Thank you.